This conference will now be recorded.
And yes, let's get started. So any questions, guys, before we get started with yesterday's session? Anything, any questions as such? So yesterday we were more looking into how do you create something called as a resource group, and how do you give access to someone on particular resource group, and what really happens if there is a conflicting access and if there's a conflicting role that you have assigned, and what really happens, let's say, if you give a particular developer a particular role called contributor only on a particular resource group and not the others, and what happens in all those things out here. So any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here? So
Hello.
our role in a real-time environment is like a bit of administration part. Now we are more looking at a DevOps role as such. Not service administrator, no, not service administrators. We are more like onto a DevOps role of things. So these classes that we are, let's say, looking at are more onto the DevOps side of things. So when you go into a real-time environment and start working, you'll mostly be working with something called CI/CD pipelines and all that stuff. So as a DevOps engineer, in order to as a DevOps engineer, in order for you to support into a DevOps role, you need a bit of administration. So not completely an administrator. Like if you were, let's say, a complete administrator course out here, you would have gone into the depth of Active Directory, explored all those things out here. But here we are more looking, let's say, our role from an infrastructure engineer perspective, like different services and so on and so forth. Also a bit of understanding of how the role assignment works and all these things out here, but more in depth of DevOps side of things. So for me to start DevOps, I need to, let's say, cover all the supporting topics for you, and then we'll have to go there. Yes. Okay. You cannot retrieve it. You cannot recover. Everything will be lost. If you delete a resource group, everything that is there inside that particular resource group will also be lost. Exactly. When you're not allowed to delete it, meaning again, whatever you do is, let's say, tracked on the subscription on the activity log. Whatever I do will be tracked out there. That's one thing. Also, all the resource groups that we were talking about yesterday, for example, let's go into our third RG. All the resource groups will come with locks. So, as an administrator or someone like an administrator would put this lock out here, you cannot remove this lock. And if you cannot remove this lock, it means that you cannot delete a particular resource group as such. So that's the logic how it boils down to. Again, we'll look at the logs and all that stuff.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Actually, yesterday I created the user with the invitation process.
Hmm.
Okay. Then after I added the free trial version in the owner admin part, but I'm not able to see that the same subscription in the invitation user actually.
Uh,
What might be the
so you have invited someone, is it like you went ahead and, let's say, invited someone into your Azure portal, is it?
correct and give the contributor role,
Okay, and you
but
gave a
that free
contributor on the
yeah.
subscription level, is it?
Correct. In the main account, in owner
Okay.
account. But that same
Did they try
subscription,
to
it should
log out
receive.
and yeah?
Yeah,
Did they
yes,
try to
yes.
log out?
Today,
Okay.
yeah, today morning also I tried. Sorry,
Okay.
I logged in, but still
So
the
what do you see
subscription
out
it
there
did not
again?
show.
Hmm.
Zero subscriptions like that in the invitation
Okay.
user.
So not in the invitation. Go to the subscription. Just type in free. Okay. Just type in out your free.
Yeah,
Sometimes there
zero
is a bug.
results. Acha.
Yeah, that's
But
what
in
I'm telling
the
you.
okay,
Good.
but in the
So
creation mode, I got that
in the
create user
creation mode,
mode.
you get it. Yes, exactly. That's what I'm telling you. Just
Hmm.
type in free here. You'll be able to see your subscription here.
Okay,
In
so
the
through
subscription
invitation I did
perspective,
not find. Through create mode I found actually. That's good.
yeah, you have the subscription, which means that you have a subscription. You have an access if you're able to create the resource groups and etc. You have the access. It's sometimes just not displays here. Sometimes there is a bug. It just not displays out here. So just go here and say free or something like this, and you will be able to see a lot of things out here.
Okay, we'll try and
Okay. Can we also go for Azure Administrator? Yes, you can also go for the Azure Administrator role, but you'll have to do a little bit of, let's say, work on the Active Directory side of things. You'll have to, let's say, do a little bit of study on the Active Directory side of things to, let's say, go into a pure administration perspective. Yes, any more questions here? Anyone, any more questions still here? So this is what we had. We had a tenant, and whenever you go and create something with, or create, let's say, an account with Azure, you get something called as a tenant, and that tenant comes up with something called as a tenant ID, and also something known as a directory ID. Both of things gets assigned to you. After that, we said in order for you to go ahead and start using the Azure portal, you need to have at least one subscription. You need to go ahead and create at least one subscription, and this is where we are coming to, and this is where we are telling, okay, fine, this is a free trial subscription out here. And after that, you would also need something called as RBACs, role based access controls out here. You need something called as a role based access control, and role based access control gives you multiple roles out there, like, owner, contributor, reader, and etc. And you need to assign someone a particular role for them to go ahead and access your particular subscription out here. If you don't do that, they won't be able to even look at your subscription. They won't be able to, let's say, even interact with your subscription. They'll be able to log into your tenant, but they won't be able to, let's say, create resource groups or create something like that. Nothing. They won't be able to do anything as such. And after you give someone a particular RBAC, like, let's say, the contributor or reader or an owner, they can now start creating something called as a very basic resource called a resource group. This is where we are. You can have resource groups, and you can also assign RBACs to a resource group. You can directly go ahead and assign RBAC to a resource group. Let's say you have thousands of resource groups out here. Let's say there's a person called a developer called, let's say, XYZ. You don't want that particular developer to have access to all the 1,000 resource groups. You just want them to have, let's say, access to a couple of them. You can go ahead and assign the access to those couple of resource groups as such. This is what you can do. This is what, let's say, we've been doing here. So any questions still here before I proceed? Anyone, any questions still here before I proceed? Anyone, any questions still here? All right, so let's go forward. Now, one question that I would like to start with today is that, let's understand this. When I ask y'all that what is the basic purpose behind using the cloud, what would you say? What is the very basic purpose? Let's say storage, security, sorry, access the data. Okay, anything else? Reducing cost, okay, of the infrastructure, yes, okay. But I'm thinking like on a very very basic level. So when I started my journey with the cloud, the only cloud that I knew was something called drive.google.com. That's where I started with. Like anyone, when you say cloud, that's what we start with. And when you say cloud, normally what happens is that we say, okay, fine, you can store a lot of data in that because you have unlimited space, you have unlimited storage and all that stuff. So I would say, for me, the very basic purpose of a cloud, from a very layman perspective, is storage of a data, or storage of data. And that's where we are getting into. Like, how can you store data into Azure, or using Azure, how can you go ahead and, let's say, store some data out here? What you can do with that particular data from a business perspective? How do I store a data? Why do I store a data? All these things out here. This is what I'm getting down to. But let me put one more question out here. Now, let's say you go to Microsoft, you say, you know what, I created, as you said, I created a tenant, I created a subscription, I have a proper role. I also went ahead and created something called as a resource group. I did all these things. I now want to store data. Can you please suggest me how can I store the data out here? The very next question Microsoft is going to ask you is that, what kind of a data are you looking at? Like, what kind of a data are you looking to store? So the same question I want to ask you all is that, if you want to store data, what kind of a data do you all look to store inside, let's say, a cloud out here? What kind of a data according to you? PDFs, okay. Photos, videos, PDFs, MP4, documents, everything, right? Now, all that you said, PDFs, videos, documents, and all that stuff that you said out here comes under a very broad classification of a data called unstructured data. So now I'm telling that if we are going into technicality of it, the types of data that are generally available out here are broadly two categories. One is a structured data, the other is an unstructured data. So let's get there. So this is what I'm now telling is that data categories are two types, structured and unstructured, or non-structured. You can tell it anything, anything works out here. Say unstructured out here. Now let's first understand what a structured data really is. Unstructured data is pretty self-explanatory, like we can get into that in a minute. But when I talk about structured data always represents itself in the form of rows and columns. Like let's say if you are looking inside an Excel sheet or something like that, that's a structured data, rows and columns. So for example, let's say I have a row here telling us, serial number and all that stuff. So let's write a simple structured data out here. I'll say student, I'll say class time. Let's say there is a serial number called 1. Let's say there is a student called XYZ. The class timing of let's say 8 a.m. And let's say there is a sorry, let's say there is a different student called ABC with a class timing of let's say 9 a.m. out here. Now this is a table that let's say is used in our institute. Let's say this is an institute, so we maintain some records out here. So this is a table that is in a row and in a column wise structure wherein I am storing the data of all the students that are registered in this particular course with their batch timing and all that stuff, so that it's easy for me to filter out at a later point in time. The question is that from this particular table, uh, I give you all telling that okay, fine, can you please identify all the students who are attending my class at 8 a.m. Can you do that? Yes, no, maybe. You can just say okay, fine, 8 a.m. there is only one student called XYZ. If I give you the name of a student, you can probably identify the time in which he comes in, right? The batch timing in which he comes in, right? So if I give you one piece of a data, you can relate that particular data to another piece. Meaning there is one piece here called the student name can be related to something called class timing out here. Since you can relate one piece to the other, this is also called as relational data. Structured or also called as relational data, always represented. Can you please get a chair out from the outside? So always let's say represented or always let's say called a relational or a structured data out here. So structured, or I can also put it as something called as a relational data. So one piece of the data relates to the other. One piece of the data can be related to other and all these things out. And traditionally, all these forms of data are stored in something called as DBMS, database management systems. DBMS, when you kind of come from an engineering background or something like that, you would have heard about this particular term called DBMS, database management systems. And there are multiple databases available out there in the market like SQL, MySQL, Cassandra, Mongo, a lot of flavors that are available out there. And traditionally all this data are stored in let's say this particular DBMS systems out here called database management systems out here. But my area of interest today is not a DBMS. My area of interest today is not a structured data, but I'm rather looking at unstructured data today. Now, if you let's say work in any of the company, or if you work anywhere out there, structured data is more in nature. Sorry, unstructured data is more in nature than a structured data. You can have log files, you can have PDF files, you can have Word files, and all that stuff. So everything else, like video, images, PDFs, Word documents, everything that you can think about, this is now called as an unstructured data. And in Azure, we call this unstructured data as blob, BLOB. binary large object. Binary large object out here. This is what or this is what is the full form or the abbreviation of something called as blob. Again, binary large object meaning it can be anything. It can be a video file. It can be, let's say, a data file. It can be a Word document. Anything as such can be called as a blob. And all these blobs are stored in something called as a blob storage account. That's where I'm now coming down to. So all this form of a data is stored into something called as a storage account. For a structured data, there are multiple things like SQL, MySQL, and all these things which we'll get into. But for an unstructured data, one of the popular services that Microsoft gives you is called as a storage account. Now, if you are, let's say, familiar with AWS, or if you know a bit of AWS, this service in AWS is called as an S3 bucket. This is called as an S3 bucket service in AWS. So again, if you're learning one cloud technology, the other one is just similar. Just the naming convention and the way you interact with that kind of changes out there. And this is going to be the area of our interest today. Like, what is a storage account? How do you store? What do you need to create a storage account, and all these things out here? Any questions till here that I can take? Anything that I can take till here before I can get with the topic? Anyone? Any questions till here? In a resource group, can you store structured data, unstructured data? Again, a resource group is just to hold a storage account or a SQL database, something like that. You can store anything as such. Again, you cannot store data directly into a resource group. You need a service which will hold the data, like storage account for unstructured, SQL for structured, or MySQL, Mongo, Cassandra, a lot of things out there that are available out there in the market. So yes, you can store, let's say, indirectly structured and unstructured data in the same resource group, but you need different services to store the same thing out there. In a free subscription, how much amount? Not like that. I will put it in a different way. In a free subscription, or in any subscription, in a particular region, let's say you're creating a storage account in a region called ECS2, you cannot create more than 250 storage accounts in a region. That's a subscription limit. That's called, there is something known as a subscription limit. So I'm talking about one storage account in let's say a particular region. You can now go ahead and create 250 storage accounts in a region. Each and every storage account has a maximum capacity of 500 terabytes. 500 terabytes. So that into 250, that is the maximum data that you can store in a region of Azure. Another region. Sorry. uh, Again, if you look at my subscription as well, let's say if you look at a free trial subscription as well, even a free trial supports like around 100 storage accounts per region. So you can also do that in a free trial. At an enterprise level, yes, 250 is the hard limit that Azure is kind of giving out there for us. Yes, any more questions here, guys? Anyone, any more questions here?
Hi, Kiran. This is Super. Kiran, I have a query
Good.
regarding that. Like we have stored the data. Okay. We have stored in the data in our desktop. For
Okay.
people from non-technical background, we can upload the data from PHP, right? PHP, actually, from
Correct.
PHP and
Mhm.
right.
Correct.
And one more question, Kiran.
Mhm.
Yesterday we have discussed about the resource group. And one more
Correct.
thing, in the resource group, basically the resource group consists of inbound, outbound tariff, I feel, right? It's the next coming classes in this case.
No, no. The resource group consists. Sorry, what is that? Inbound and outbound? I didn't get you. Can you come again, please?
Traffic, traffic.
No, 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 no. It's not the resource group. I'm not getting into that, let's say, concept yet. The resource group is just like a folder. It's just like an empty shell.
Okay,
That's it.
okay, okay. Thank you.
So, in order for you to create a storage account, these are the things that you need. You need an Azure tenant, which we have. You need an Azure subscription. You need a proper role on the Azure subscription or a particular resource group. So, I'm telling an R back out here. After you create, let's say, or after you have an RBAC, you need to go ahead and create something called as a resource group. You also need a resource group which can hold your resources. Inside a resource group is where you can go ahead and create a service called storage account and then host or then hold the data inside that particular storage account. We'll see how do you hold the data and all that stuff. This is now the hierarchy what you have. So tenant, under tenant, subscription, under subscription, a resource group. Under a resource group, you have a storage account. So again, you can have one or many tenants, and under each and every tenant, you can have multiple subscriptions. Under each and every subscription, you can have multiple resource group. Under each and every resource group, you can have multiple storage accounts out there. This is how, let's say, the formation, or this is how, let's say, the structure goes ahead right now. So let's get there. Firstly, let's do one thing. I will go ahead, create a new resource. I'll say add or create. And here it's going to ask me a couple of things like what is the name of my subscription out here? What is the name of the resource group? I'll say this is a storage RG. I'll say storage hyphen RG. Just give some name out here. I'll select a location. I'll select a region for this particular resource group. I'll again come back on what is the significance of selecting a particular region. Why do we select a particular region and etc. But since it's an empty folder, I can literally create this anywhere, not a problem. So I'll say ECS2. I'll say next. And tags, I can optionally tag my resources. Let's say owner, I'll say something like abc@gmail.com. This is something that I'm going to give here. Or abc@accenture.com, abc@whatever company.com that you have. I'll say review and create this out. And I'll say create. And it's going to take me a minute to go ahead and create this. It's called resource group with storage RG and all that stuff. And I'll be able to see this particular storage RG out here. And I have the particular access, meaning my access is coming from the subscription. I'm an owner at the subscription level. So my access is coming down from a subscription. So I can create, modify, delete any resources out here. And here I intend to create a storage account. So I'll say create here. So I'm inside the resource group. And after I go inside the resource group, I'll say create. And you have all the services that you can create out here. Just scroll down. You see there is something called what? A storage account. Just click on this one. And now it's telling Microsoft Azure highly durable and all that stuff. Let's scroll down. Let's see what it asks. It's saying select the subscription in which you want to create and create a new or an existing resource group to organize and manage your storage account together with other resources. So what it's telling is it's asking me what is the subscription that I want to create my storage account inside. So it definitely needs a subscription because here you need a subscription out here, and you'll only get a subscription if you create one. And then it's asking me what is the resource group under which you want to create this particular storage service. And again, I have a lot of resource groups. These are all the resource groups that are there as a part of this particular subscription. I can say it is storage RG. This is a resource group under which I want to create this out. And let's say go ahead with storage RG. Let's scroll down. There is something called instance details. Now, any resource in Azure is called as an instance. It's just called as an instance. For example, I'm creating a storage service. I'll just tell that it's an instance of a storage account that I'm creating. This is what I'll technically, kind of call this out. I'll just scroll down and it's asking me for what? A storage account name. I'll just give a name here telling it is storage. What's it telling here? Name is already taken. Now here there is a rule. Unlike a resource group that you can just go ahead and name anything, you cannot go ahead and give any name to a storage service. You cannot go ahead and do that. Azure will not allow you to do that. Azure follows something called as a naming convention for a storage account. The first rule here is that the name should be unique. Meaning no one else in the entire world should have taken the same name that you're trying to, let's say, create your services. The name should be unique. This is the first rule that I have. So what I do is for my name to be unique, I'll add some special characters out here. I get the second error here. And what does it tell you? The field can contain only what? Lower letters and numbers, and it should be between 3 to 24 characters, which is the second and the third rule out here that I want to, let's say, talk about, is that the name of the storage service that you create cannot be less than 3 characters. It cannot exceed more than 24 characters. 3 to 24 maximum and the minimum, or minimum and the maximum length. 3 cannot have a special character. No special characters. Even space is considered as a special character out here. Space is also considered as a special character. You can only have lower letters, not even uppercase numbers or not even uppercase letters, lower letters and numbers, and you cannot have any special characters as such. This is how you can go ahead and, let's say, do the naming convention of a storage account. Then isn't it not difficult for an organization to go ahead and name their service? Yes, it is difficult, but the organization typically follows a particular naming convention pattern. When I say a typical naming convention pattern, let's understand this. Let's say that you are working for a client called Uber. You're working with a client called Uber. You want to create a storage account service for this particular client called Uber out here. And let's say you are creating this particular service in a location called East US2. Let's say typically you're creating this in East US2 out here. And you're creating this particular service for a team called development team. I'm just giving some sample values. This can be QA team, DevOps team, whatever it is. So I will do something like this. I will say the name of the team plus the name of the service that I want to create for them. In this case, the name of the service is nothing but the storage account service that I'm creating for them, plus the name of the client or the name of the project. You can replace the client or the project, anything interchangeably, plus the location in which you're creating this in. I will add all these things together and I'll get a unique name. For example, something like this. The name of the team is dev. The name of the service is a storage account service. Again, if I do a storage account and etc., I'll exceed this limit of 3 to 24 characters. So what I'll do is I'll say store ACC, something like this, to represent my storage account service. I'm saying store ACC. The name of the client is Uber. I'll say UB Uber. And the location here is ECUS2. I'll say EU2. And this now can become a unique name. Come back here, copy and paste this out. No errors, nothing. It's now giving me a unique name. Let's say I want to create multiple storage accounts with the same name. I'll start with, let's say, the first storage account to be something like this plus 0. Second storage account something like this plus 1. Third storage account something like this 2, so and so and so.